Welcome everyone to the Starting Point Education Channel. Violet Marrero is joining us this evening as a survivor advocate of intimate partner violence, previously known as domestic violence, but we'll be talking about it in depth. And the most important part of this conversation, I believe, is that Violet looks at the healing process. And that's really the important piece for all of us. She's into prevention and healing. So I really find it fascinating to talk to her. My name is Loretta Depka, and we put all of our podcasts on YouTube, and you can find it simply by going to startingpoint.org and hit the education tab, and you can find many other topics. So again, thank you for joining us tonight. Violet, I think it's important everyone knows that you, besides being a survivor advocate, you are a leading program developer, educator with nearly 20 years of experience in the field of injury prevention. As a survivor advocate, you've dedicated time and energy to empowering others in recovering from domestic violence and cultivating healthy relationships based on mutual love and respect. And Violet, that's the piece that I find so interesting and hope you'll be able to share with everyone. So why don't we start? And start with a definition, Violet. Let's talk about what it is.
Well, I'm going to use the World Health Organization's definition, which is any behavior within an intimate relationship that causes physical, psychological, or sexual harm to those in the relationship, including acts of physical aggression, sexual coercion, psychological abuse, and controlling behaviors.
The controlling behaviors cover a big field. Does that include like stalking and all Absolutely. Of those things? Okay, great. So there was one statistic I read that I just really sticks with me. On an average, nearly 20 people every minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the US. During 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. I just want to touch on that because I believe that people, when they hear the term domestic violence or intimate partner violence, they're not focusing that men can also be in those circumstances.
Agreed. And I know personally that I've known men personally who have been involved in violent relationships, abusive relationships. And so, yes, it does. I think it crosses all boundaries in terms of male, female, social economic status, race, country. It's totally pervasive. It completely covers, everyone, unfortunately.
Before we get to sort of the spiritual side of it and the healing, can we talk a little bit about, what stops an individual from removing themselves from these dangerous relationships?
Fear and shame. I think that's, anything that I would say outside of that would come back to those two things. Fear of it depends on the dynamic, but fear of economic insecurity, right? Fear of losing your children. Perhaps your partner is the breadwinner in the house and that's the abuser. So there's so many fears, and there's a lot of shame, shame and fear about telling anyone that you're a part of this and what what that person is going to perceive of you, how you'll be perceived in your profession. I mean, I think that there's that fear is like a sinkhole, everything falls into it, and it blinds you, and your decisions come from that place. So I'm speaking from my personal experience. I can't speak for everyone, but in my experience, it was fear and shame.
Violet, when I think about the shame, I mean, you are really talking about this this kind of violence crosses every economic, every class, every culture that you've mentioned. I think we always assume it's, the downtrodden, the poor, and that's not the case at all, right? Those numbers are just as high in the Ozzie and Harriet house, we think, that everybody lives.
Right. Absolutely. Lawyers, doctors, nurses, people of all backgrounds and professions. And again, of all orientations and, male, female, all of it. It's very unfortunate that it's that pervasive, but I think that, it's really important for people to be aware of the fact that not only is this something that is incredibly prevalent in our culture, unfortunately, it's also something that people can heal and reclaim their lives from, which is really important.
You talk about mind, body, and spirit a lot when we've had conversations. So someone leaves, then what? What happens? How do they heal themselves, I guess, is what I think of when I talk to you. I look at you, successful, happy, gorgeous. How did you heal yourself?
Well, do you want me to tell my story? I can tell the
Absolutely.
story and then I
You're
can.
comfortable sharing it.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. It won't be anything too graphic because I'm not really comfortable with that kind of detail, but I think I can get the point across. So I spent the better part of 20 years in a codependent, toxic, abusive relationship, and for a really long time, I felt like a victim in that experience, and I came to appreciate that for me in my life, that it was it happened for me, that it was part of my purpose, and more importantly, that the force, which is what I refer to as my higher power or God, if you will, was always with me. And a part of that, and a part of that experience, as hard as that is to believe, for me, this skipped a generation. I know that there are plenty of stats that show, parents model that behavior and then their children end up in those situations. But for my parents, they grew up in homes with fathers who were incredibly abusive to their children and their wives. And that was not my experience. So it did skip a generation. My story really began with a traumatic experience in my childhood. When I was 6, we actually moved from Germany, where my father was stationed in the army, to Philadelphia. And that was in 1979. So for those of you who are familiar with Philadelphia, it might as well have been segregated at that time. The community really wasn't happy to see a Puerto Rican family move in to the community. It was a Polish community. So my father is Puerto Rican and my mother is German and Irish. And so the fact that they were a biracial couple, I think, just sort of added fuel to the fire in terms of their fear and their hatred. They spray painted a swastika on our house and threw bricks through our window.
Oh, horrible.
And they destroyed my father's car while we all watched at the window, and I remember seeing him just feeling really emasculated, which to this day just breaks my heart when I think about it, because this is a man who volunteered to serve in Vietnam and fought for those same individuals who were destroying our property and who were, committing these hate crimes to our family. And so, that really left, obviously scarred me, but even more than that, when I went to school, the first day of school, all the kids were really friendly and happy. And maybe a day or two later, no one wanted to be my friend. And I came to realize over time that, they must have went home and told their friends about me. My birth name is actually Elvira. I was named after my Puerto Rican grandmother, who played a really integral role in my development as a person and as a spirit. She was just a very devout Catholic, and she taught me that love is far more powerful than fear. She invited kids from the neighborhood who didn't have a place to go to live with her. And, she had 10 children of her own and had no idea how she was going to feed them, but she would tell me stories about those days, that she would pray to God to give her enough food to feed not just their stomachs, but their souls. And these were white children. So she showed me that, love sees no color. And those same children who grew up, and a couple of them married into our family, and one of them was my mother. And so I am grateful that I had that experience to balance out that traumatic experience with racism. But regardless of, how much love there was there in that example, I still felt like there was something wrong with me, and that meant that I wasn't good enough. And I believe that at the root of what leaves us vulnerable to accepting less than what we deserve is that belief that we're not enough. And so that really sort of like set that foundation, if you will, that for my experience with intimate partner violence. And so I met the father of my children when I was 16, so I was very young. And he got into, he became an addict, and 3 years later, and that was just when my son was turning a year old, and the abuse started then when I was 19.
Oh.
And so I was young. He really turned into a completely different person and abused me in every way that I described in that definition. And so, I knew what he was doing was wrong, but I felt like I didn't have any power. And I was afraid. I was really afraid. And it was, codependent. And as much as it hurt me, I still loved him, and I wanted to believe that things would get better. And I know that that's hard to understand if you've never been in that situation, but I have a feeling if you have, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is, you just want to believe that that person can change. And so, the physical part was ugly, but that stopped after I had him arrested. And then it became more, and I should share this because I think it's important for anyone who has had that experience. I had him arrested, and then I recanted. Which a lot of women end up doing, because the consequences of, locking up basically your partner means that you don't have an income. There's a bunch of things that go along with that. So I understand where that comes from, but it was really the psychological abuse that was much worse. And that it got to the point where, I felt completely worthless, and I hated myself. And I want to say it changed for me, and then that lasted for many years, but I was fortunate enough to watch. This is gonna, I hope that people watch it as well. Tina Turner's movie, What's Love Got to Do with It?
Yes.
And it was incredibly inspirational. She took her power back in this incredible way in that movie, and I saw that she did it by building her spirit. She began chanting, and I had no frame of reference for any of that. So I began chanting. I chanted for an hour. I had an hour drive to work. I chanted for an hour going there, and I chanted an hour coming back every day. And I did that for about a year, and I began to feel better. And then I met someone who offered to teach me meditation. And so I began learning how to meditate. I meditated for a couple years, actually, before I had the strength, courage, and hope to leave that relationship. But I'll tell you what, I never knew I had what I needed inside, that it was really an inside job, that it wasn't something that I was going to be able to have someone else save me, if you will, or get me out of that situation. It was incredibly empowering. And I also think that it's also a tremendous tool in terms of healing. I know that it has played, when we're talking about that triangle of mind, body, and spirit, meditation pulls it all together for me. And it remains a strong part of my practice. But, after I left him, I was enraged. And I used that anger as sort of like my fuel. And what I learned by building up my spirituality, and this is even after doing the meditation, and my practice sort of kind of went to the side. And I'm sure that, again, anyone who's been through this knows that the aftermath, especially when you have children, can be really difficult. And it was most certainly the case for me. So it's not this, straight journey or path, if you will. Sometimes There are going to be things that come, challenges that you have to overcome. But I think it's really important to remember that, you can not only survive this, but you can thrive following the experience. And it's again, for me, it was really all about it being an inside job for me, the building myself up, gaining the courage. And I've been tremendously blessed to have incredible people who've come into my life to support me on my journey. And I would not be here if it was not for all of them.
You spoke when we were preparing for this, how important it is for parents to model healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about how difficult it was with children, but you have wonderful children who have grown up beautifully, and that shows your spirit and your heart. Talk about that a little bit. How did you manage all of that?
There was a lot of therapy involved, just sincerely. And I think that that's really important for people to recognize. I didn't believe in therapy. It took me a long time to make my way to the starting point, which was really where I found, what I needed to recover. Of course, there was a lot of support outside of that, but I really did find the keys to my recovery at the starting point. And with my children, it was the same way. My children had to go to therapy and really work on the things that they had experienced themselves as a result of it. They unfortunately, and I shouldn't say unfortunately, I don't think it's unfortunate, but they don't necessarily they don't all have a relationship with their father, which is also something that, children have to work through. Sure. And I think it's really important for parents who, have young children and they're thinking about their parenting and how to build that up. In terms of prevention, the first intimate relationship that any of us see is the one that our parents have. And the modeling that takes place there, you'll often see that we kind of like repeat those patterns, if you will. My parents did not have an abusive relationship that way, but they were both children of, toxic, abusive households. So I wouldn't necessarily call their relationship super wholesome and healthy either. Not that I'm pointing that finger. I'm really not. But I think it's so important for parents to model love, to their children, unconditional love, trust. It's so important for children to trust, because when they experience that with their parents, they know what it feels like. It's like a frequency that you visit, right? And like that feeling, oh, wait, that's what I'm aiming for. And they can build their relationships, friendships, romantic relationships based on that, because it gives them this sense of faith in themselves, courage, and just they're in their own skin. They're not asking themselves like, what's wrong with me? They're not thinking that if they do something wrong, they're going to lose mommy and daddy's love, and I think that when two people model that type of relationship romantically for their children, and we can see this in the statistics, I don't have them offhand, but you can see how generationally it just it continues as a vicious cycle, because people learn what they live, and children most certainly do. And so it's important to, if at all possible, if you're in a relationship and your parents, like, work on that relationship. That's where the therapy begins, so that your children don't necessarily need to go to therapy to address something like that happening to them in the future.
And you feel so strongly about prevention, about teaching, particularly teens, how to have relationships. Am I not misrepresenting what I've heard you say before?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I'm very much so interested in sharing my experience and the insights that I can offer on how to develop those healthy relationships, which, there's a lot of research out there that shows that adolescent friendships actually set the foundation. And so if you can teach adolescents just the foundation of the relationship in terms of building it, I think people look at friendships and romantic relationships as these totally, completely different things. And the truth is that a good relationship starts as a friendship. It has, that a really good friendship, one that's based on trust, one that's, one that has taken time to develop, one that, you feel in your gut, like this person, our relationship has been tried and it's true. They're consistent. They show up for me. They don't judge me. They're there for me. All of the things that all of us look for in those relationships and the people that we want to surround ourselves with, because you walk away feeling good from those experiences. That's what you're looking for in a romantic partner. And I think our society paints it as a very different picture. And that's why we're constantly fed different messages from movies and TV shows where it's just like, oh, love at first sight, and you're caught up in the emotion. I get that, I do, but I think there's a lot to be said for getting to know someone before you give them access to your heart, to your body. Like, these are things that you wouldn't dream of doing with a stranger, would you? And yet we do those things in intimate relationships, and we give ourselves permission to do it because that's what we're seeing reflected in our culture. That does not mean that it's right. I mean, I think if we look at our culture period, we could probably conclude that it's not. It's not serving us. It's not serving healthy relationships that are based on love and trust. It's not serving our children who are growing up in this culture. And that's really what I want to be a part of, changing that. I have two beautiful granddaughters, and I do, I spend time with them, and it's all about that. It's about showing them, what does unconditional love look and feel like? Because I want you to know that. And when they get to their adolescence and to, become adolescents, I will certainly be working with them on this too.
You talk about recovery, and you talk specifically about the 12 steps being so helpful in your own recovery. I think sometimes there's some confusion that the 12 steps are just for alcohol and drugs. Mm-hmm. I know at Starting Point, we all think that's, recovery, that term and the steps can be applied to any of us that are trying to improve our lives. But you had an interesting, a couple pillars that you talk about that you pulled from the steps that I'd love for you to share.
Sure, and I have to attribute these to Vince because they're totally not mine. But it's acceptance, surrender, faith, and trust. We have to accept the truth, or else we can't do anything about it until we accept what's actually happening in our lives, right? And surrendering the piece of it, well, surrendering it all, really. In the spiritual journey, for me, it was really about surrendering it, because if I was trying to fix it on my own, I was just breaking it more, if that makes sense. And faith and trust are the other pieces of it that are hard, but that's why I think it's so important to address mind, body, and spirit. If you are doing the meditation and you are moving your body and you are feeding your spirit, that food, like all of that nutrition that you need, which for me, most definitely fellowship has been part of that. Good relationships. I have amazing friendships that are more like family to me sometimes than my own family, because we're so connected and we support one another. So I think that that's really where it's at. It's, for sure, the steps changed everything for me, because I began to understand that I needed to really not just, to trust myself again. I feel like that's something that the steps really support you in doing. They sort of give you these guidelines to follow. And as you're doing those, you eventually develop that trust in yourself. And that's, I think, really important in terms of recovering from intimate partner violence, because unless you trust yourself, you will continue to make the same mistakes. You'll continue to attract, like, Wayne Dyer talks about this, like, you'll repeat the class. You'll have failed the test and you'll have to take it again, so to speak. Life has a way of bringing those situations back to you. And so when you learn to trust yourself, that you're not letting anyone in that hasn't earned the right to be there, if that makes sense.
It does. It really does. But you're talking about the trust. I can only imagine how difficult it is to to find trust again. And like you said, in yourself as well as in others. And there's no shortcut, is there?
No, I don't think so. But and I have to say there have been people in my life that I think really supported me in not giving up on me. And so, if this is a part of the experience for someone that you love, I would say that's probably the greatest gift that you could give them. That you continue to believe in them because you're seeing who they truly are, which is totally capable of taking themselves out of this experience, of recovering from this experience, and having what they desire and deserve in their lives. So yes, trust is hard to build, but it's like anything else. It's something that you exercise. It's a muscle, right? And so
Sure.
when you're faced with challenges, it doesn't mean that you're not going to experience, I don't want to call them failures, but that you're not going to have to take that lesson a couple times before you get it. When we learn to ride a bike, we don't all just get right on it and ride, right? A lot of times we'll fall, and that's okay, as long as you pick yourself back up again and get back on the bike. And I think that that's a really important piece of it, is to never give up hope on yourself, to continue keeping the vision in front of you of what it is that you want for yourself in your life and for your family. Because so many people who are involved in this have children. And so, your children, you think about them and what it is that you want for their future, whatever it is that it takes to inspire you, to keep your eye on the prize, to keep you getting up every day and continuing to practice the principles.
Any advice for the person who loves their family member and they're watching them suffer through an abusive relationship? Do you stay out of it? Do you address it? There's 1,000 answers to that, I'm sure. But Violet, when you were going through it, was there somebody that you wished had stepped in or understood, or what do we do? I guess is my question.
I think one of the most important things you can do is validate their experience and letting them know that what is happening is wrong, that they do deserve better, and that there is better that's waiting for them, that they have the courage, and the will to take those steps. And, there's a lot to be said for unconditional love and non-judgment. If you're not living their life, you don't know what they're dealing with. And so just because they don't take those steps doesn't mean that they weren't listening. I was in this for 20 years. It's a really long time. And it wasn't that I didn't leave or that we didn't separate on a number of occasions. It was just really hard to finally break free. And I have to say, it would have made all the difference to have someone validating my experience, but more than that, giving me unconditional love, letting me know that no matter what I did, that it was going to be okay.
And that's, when I hear you talk, Violet, you're always so upbeat and positive, that it's not, I think of the family member who would say, well, I think he's abusive and I can't be around him and I don't want to be around you. Those kinds of unsupportive ways that just can't happen in these circumstances. We have to stay close, right?
Yeah, and I won't judge anyone who doesn't want to be around an abuser, but that doesn't mean that you can't create a relationship with them that's apart from that person,
Right.
or at least try, your very best to do so and stay connected. I think it's important to remember that people who are going through challenging experiences like that need all the support that they can get. This is a very, very difficult experience. And if they have, given you the precious gift of their confidence so that you're aware of what's happening to them, that's something that you really want to value and give as much as you can in terms of understanding and non-judgment in particular.
And I imagine from, again, some of the things you said tonight, that to remain open to new relationships, you have to first heal yourself. Is that what I heard you sort of imply?
Yeah. Yes. I at least this was my experience. I can't imagine that, you don't work on it and then boom, you're able to just get back out there. God bless anyone who can. I was not able to do that. I'm still a work in progress. But I know that I won't accept anything less than I deserve now, and it's been 12 years that it's taken me to get to this point, but there's no way that I would allow someone to come into my life, because it has happened. When I initially started dating, of course, those things happened. You end up meeting the same person, so to speak, and the people that were healthy, I wasn't healthy enough for. So I would sabotage those kind of relationships, which is why I think it's really important to seek therapeutic support, because there's something to be said for someone who isn't related to you or obligated to you as, in any way, shape, or form, other than providing this safe space for you to heal in. And I know I found that at the starting point. And it was integral in my healing, because I needed to talk all of it through. That was just my process. And I think that, skilled therapists and counselors are really important in the healing process when it comes to intimate partner violence.
Did we miss anything, Violet? Is there anything in closing you'd like to add?
I think the only thing that I would add is that it's really important for us in this experience, for anyone who has this experience, to be aware of the fact that, it takes time to heal, and that, our wounds are really calls for love. And when we're in an abusive relationship, we abandon ourselves. And so the wounds are there to remind us that we have to return to ourselves and give ourselves what it is that we haven't been giving, which is love. And once we learn to love ourselves again, I think it really does open up the gates for us to be able to approach intimate relationships from a healthy perspective.
And Violet, I just want to go back to something you said that's really sticking with me, is that we can prevent it if we believe in ourselves to start and we love ourselves to begin with.
Absolutely.
And that's what you encourage teens to do, right? Know themselves before. Violet, this has been so helpful. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you spending time with us and sharing your story and reminding us that, it's not a bad thing when we love ourselves. So thank you very much. We all adore you here at Starting Point. You know that. So we'll talk again, I'm sure.
Thank you, Loretta.
Everyone, have a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us. Visit our education channel on startingpoint.org. I'm Loretta Depka, and thank you. We have another podcast to be dropped shortly, and that will be on the emotion code. So I hope you will be joining us. Many thanks.